Day 1. The house. I didn't know much about the house when I bought it. The listing was vague, but the price was right. Cheap, actually. Suspiciously so. Yet there was no denying its appeal. Nestled on the outskirts of town, just far enough from the noise but close enough for convenience, it had that worn charm you don't find in modern homes. The kind that suggested history. I wasn't sure what kind of history. The real estate agent hadn't mentioned much beyond, "It's an old place." But I convinced myself that was the beauty of it. The mystery, the unknown. I imagined how I'd make it my own. Fresh paint, new floors, a few repairs here and there. But as soon as I stepped inside, it didn't feel like mine. The air was thick, like the walls had absorbed decades of silence. It smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic. Dust covered everything in a fine, grimy layer. I stood in the foyer, my hand still on the doorknob, wondering if I'd made a mistake. The feeling only deepened when I finally settled in that night. The silence stretched on, pressing in, swallowing the sound of my own breathing. It was too quiet, like the house was waiting for something. For me. I shook the thought away. I was being ridiculous. But still, I locked my bedroom door that night, not sure if it was to keep something out or keep something in. Day 2. The discovery. It was the second night when I found the diary. I had been unpacking the last of the boxes in what was going to be my office, a small room at the back of the house with a view of the yard, where the grass had grown wild and tangled over the years. It wasn't much, but it had potential. That's when I saw it, wedged deep in a corner of the built-in bookshelf. It was so far back that at first I didn't even notice it. The flashlight beam caught a dull glimmer of leather beneath the dust. I pulled it out, my fingers brushing over the cracked spine, and sat down at the desk to examine it. It was old, clearly. Older than the house itself, maybe. The black leather cover was brittle, flaking at the edges, and the pages inside had yellowed with age. I opened to the first page, careful not to tear the fragile paper. The handwriting was spidery, almost illegible at first glance. I had to squint to make out the words. The date scrawled at the top of the page read, November 12th, 1824. My pulse quickened. The thought of holding something so old, so untouched by time, excited me. I had always loved history, and now I held a small piece of it in my hands. I turned the page, drawn in despite the hour. The entries started out mundane enough. The writer, Samuel, as he called himself, wrote about his daily life, tending to the land, the long hours of labor, the cold winters. He mentioned his wife, his children, though his descriptions of them were strangely detached. There was no warmth in his words, no affection, just the barest acknowledgement of their existence. As I read, a growing unease settled in the pit of my stomach, but I ignored it. It was just a diary, after all. Nothing more. Right? Day 4. The dreams. The next few days blurred together. I spent my mornings unpacking, trying to make the place livable, but the diary gnawed at my thoughts. I would sit for hours in the office, turning page after page, losing track of time as Samuel's story unfolded. He was a strange man, to say the least. His entries grew darker as the weeks wore on. He started to speak less of his family and more of the land around the house, specifically, the woods. At first, it was a simple fascination. He would describe the trees, the way they towered over the house, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out like fingers. But soon, the woods became more than just a backdrop to his life. They became a presence, something living, watching him from just beyond the clearing. And then he mentioned the dream. It started as a vague description. He dreamed of a man running through the woods, stumbling, falling, but the details were too vivid, too real. Samuel wrote about the man's gasping breaths, the sharp branches that tore at his skin, the wet crunch of leaves beneath his feet. And then, always, the dream would end the same way. The man would fall, and Samuel would wake up with his heart pounding in his chest, his hands clutching the sheets like he'd been holding something, or someone. The dreams terrified me. Not because of what they described, but because of how familiar they felt. I had never had a dream like that. Never. But as I read Samuel's words, I felt as though I had. Like the dream was mine, not his. I hadn't even noticed I was trembling until I dropped the diary. It hit the floor with a soft thud, the pages fluttering open. I stared at it, my pulse racing. I told myself it was just a story, just an old man's ramblings. But it didn't feel that way. I wasn't sure what was more terrifying, that Samuel had these dreams, or that I was beginning to understand them. Day 6, the forest. I avoided the woods after that. I couldn't explain why, but something about them felt wrong. I would stand at the window in my office, staring out at the tree line, the tangled branches swaying in the wind, and feel a coldness creep into my bones. But every time I looked, I would see movement, just at the edge of my vision, like someone was standing just out of sight, waiting, watching. I knew it was my mind playing tricks on me. I hadn't been sleeping well. The nights were filled with strange, restless dreams. Dreams I couldn't quite remember but left me waking up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding as if I'd been running for hours. One night I thought I saw someone standing just beyond the trees. A figure, tall and thin, barely visible through the shadows. But when I blinked, they were gone. I stopped looking after that. Day 7. The confession. That morning I couldn't resist the diary any longer. It called to me from the bookshelf, and I found myself sitting at the desk before I even realized what I was doing. My hands shook as I flipped to the next page, desperate to see where Samuel's story led. The entry was short, only a few lines, hastily scrawled across the page. I have done what the voice told me to do. The man will not be found. The soil covers him well. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands went cold as I read the words again, and again. The soil covers him well. I slammed the diary shut, my breath coming in shallow, uneven bursts. What had I just read? Had Samuel murdered someone? The thought alone made my skin crawl. I wanted to throw the diary into the fireplace, to burn it and pretend I had never found it. But instead, I found myself staring out the window again. The woods seemed to stretch closer, the trees leaning in like they were listening. Something told me to go outside, to check the yard, to dig, but I didn't, not yet. Day 9, the backyard. I lasted 2 more days before I finally gave in. The words from the diary echoed in my mind like a mantra. The soil covers him well. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a shovel from the shed and walked to the backyard, my feet heavy, my stomach churning with dread. The air was thick with humidity, the sky overcast. Thunder rumbled in the distance as I approached the spot where the grass had grown unnaturally tall, the weeds tangled together in thick knots. I started digging, the shovel slicing into the earth with a sickening thunk. At first, I thought I had imagined it. The shovel hit something solid. But when I knelt down and scraped the dirt away with my hands, I saw it. An old, worn leather boot, half buried beneath the soil. I recoiled, my heart hammering in my chest. I stared at the boot, the shape it made beneath the earth, unmistakably human. I ran back inside, slamming the door behind me. I felt sick, dizzy. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening. But it was. Day 12. The descent. I stopped leaving the house after that. The world outside felt too big, too loud, too real. I couldn't face it, not with what I knew. The diary was the only thing that made sense anymore, the only thing that felt familiar. I read it obsessively, losing myself in Samuel's words, his confessions. He had killed them, the travelers, the drifters. He buried their bodies beneath the trees, in the yard, in the places where no one would ever find them. I was losing track of time. Days blended together in a haze of sleepless nights and frantic reading. The house groaned around me. The walls seemed to close in. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway. Sometimes I thought I saw something, someone, moving at the edge of the woods, just beyond the window. A dark shape, flickering in and out of sight. But whenever I looked, there was nothing. Only the trees, swaying in the wind. Day 15. The final entry. I finished the diary last night. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. The words were pulling me in, dragging me down into their depths, into Samuel's mind, his madness. The final entry was dated April 15th, 1826. In it, Samuel described the last of his killings, the final offering he made to the voice that had been guiding him. But then, scrawled in the margin, there was a note. A frantic, desperate message, written in shaky handwriting. I am not alone. There is blood on my hands, but it is not mine. I must finish what I started. I dropped the diary, my breath catching in my throat. The words swirled in my mind, twisting, warping. What did he mean? Finish what I started. What had he started? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every sound, every creak of the house made my skin crawl. The footsteps, the whispers. They were real. I knew they were. The woods were alive with movement, shadows darting between the trees. They were waiting for me. Day 18. The truth. I went to the library today. I had to know, had to understand. The town records were old, but I found what I was looking for. In 1826, a man named Jonathan Price had been executed for the murder of 6 people. His home, now my home, had been the site of the killings. He had buried the bodies in the backyard beneath the trees. Price had kept a diary. I felt sick. My hands trembled as I read the report, my mind racing. Price had written about his victims, about his obsession with the woods, the voices that drove him to kill. But there was no Samuel. There was no mention of him in the records. Then who had written the diary I found? Whose words had I been reading? Day 20. It's been 2 days since I found the truth. 2 days since everything came crashing down around me. There was no Samuel. There never was. The diary I found, it wasn't Samuel's. It wasn't Jonathan Price's. It was mine. The memories are coming back now in fragments, in flashes. The blood, the bodies, the shovel in my hands. I buried them. I buried them all. The house isn't haunted by the past. It's haunted by me.